Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the collection Spider-Man: Birth of Venom. In 1984, Marvel made comic book history by releasing the first issue of the monumental 12-part series Secret Wars. And now that there's been like 6 other series called that, it's also known as Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. The comic was notable for a whole lot of reasons, but I'm not here to talk about its strengths and weaknesses. That's for another review. Instead, I'm here to talk about toys. That's right, Secret Wars came about because a toy company wanted to make figures based on Marvel characters, and more than that, they wanted a big comic title to tie all the toys into. But still more than that, in order to help the toy company out with some designs that were just too complex to make cheaply, Marvel conceived of an all-black suit for Spider-Man, with just a white spider logo instead of his usual blue and reds with the complicated web design all over them. Within the comic, Spider-Man's costume was torn, and so he attempted to use what he thought was a costume-making machine to get a new one. But instead, it gave him the now infamous black costume that seemed to move and react to his thoughts. When Spider-Man returned from Battleworld, the distant planet where Secret Wars took place, he would continue wearing the black costume. And that's where these stories pick up. So let's see what trouble this change of threads gets him into and take this away. The comic opens on Spider-Man bounding from the transport that whisked him to and from Battleworld, carrying with him a human Kurt Connors and some snazzy new threads. Immediately, he runs across the cops who don't recognize him. Oh, sure, regular Spider-Man gets a pass, but all black Spider-Man? Him you pull a gun on. Typical. Luckily, the cops are distracted by the appearance of the Avengers, also returning from Battleworld. The Fantastic Four come through a bit later, I think, and the X-Men actually end up in Japan for some reason, where they fight a Godzilla-like monster. No, I'm not even joking. Pete uses the distraction to get him and Connors out of there, not wanting a news hound to show up with a camera and get a lucky picture of Connors' face and ruin his private life, as the Doc occasionally transforms into the Lizard. It's funny that this is the concern because you know if this was today, there'd already be like a million photos and videos of them up on Twitter, Insta, and TikTok by now. Once Connors is reunited with his family, Spider returns home and gets quickly back to business as usual. He spends most of the rest of his black suit debut issue, the one where they're so proud of the new outfit that they recreated the Amazing Fantasy 15 cover for its issue cover, simply telling an arguing couple about how great New York is. Because of course he does. But moving on from that issue, we find him dealing with a guy named The Rose, who's half gimp and half mobster, and is trying to fix football games. Football games? You fiend! He also fights new villain Puma, a businessman who transforms into a were-cougar simply because he's Native American, so obviously that gives him magical powers. Yeah, that's not offensive at all. But I do appreciate that they also make fun of his name. Oh, you poor man, you were named after a sneaker! Most of this comic is a build-up to Spider-Man facing off against Hobgoblin, the knockoff Green Goblin, who supposedly died in a pre-Secret Wars fight with Spider-Man when his battle van crashed into the Hudson. There's a lot of struggle over the battle van, including Spidey fighting Jack-O-Lantern, the knockoff Hobgoblin, over it. Apparently, Hobby's fine though, and even partners up with the Gimp, the Rose. Man, how's he get those silly-looking glasses to stay on? But we stop just before the actual fight. That's because these issues are only here because they showcase Peter slowly learning about his new costume. First he learns that it can transform into regular clothes, and he can get it to hang itself up with just a mental command. And it comes back to him with just as little prompting. Clearly this thing is not made of regular cloth, but Peter still feels the need to wash it like a normal outfit, which seems a little weird, honestly. Pete begins to get worried when the costume starts resisting leaving him, and we see Peter getting more and more exhausted while using it. This is because while he sleeps at night, the costume climbs back on him and takes him out patrolling. This is actually kind of horrifying if you think about it, but also kind of laughably silly to see it in practice. Aw, he looks so peaceful. As we learn this, we also get a pretty famous scene that's Pete's dream during this late night run, that sees him running from a monstrous version of the outfit, and his old and new outfits fighting for control over him. The dream freaks Peter out enough that he finally takes up Mr. Fantastic on the offer he made Peter during the Secret Wars to take a look at the costume. Mr. Fantastic runs a battery of tests that lead him to conclude that the costume is alive. Which, like, duh? It's also feeding off Peter in hoping to permanently bond with him, but thanks to a sonic gun, Mr. Fantastic is able to get the symbiote off Peter and contain it. Since, you know, those were his clothes and now he's naked, Johnny Storm offers to get him some new threads. Never trust Johnny Storm with anything important. Never trust Johnny Storm with anything important. True to form, Johnny sticks Pete in an old Fantastic Four costume, puts a paper bag on his head with eye holes cut out, and sticks a sign on his back, and yes, it says, "Kick me." On his way home, Peter feels compelled to stop a crime in this outfit, accidentally grabbing a lot of media attention while doing so, though they apparently take to calling him just the unknown superhero. How they didn't go with the bombastic bagman, I will never know. Missed opportunities, I'm telling ya. Guess Pete's just gonna have to suit up and take Hobgoblin on in the classic getup. But again, we don't get to see that. Instead, we skip on to the Web of Spider-Man #1, the third ever Spider-Man title to be created. I actually own a physical copy of this issue because a good friend of mine got it for me for my birthday once, which is pretty cool. Just before this issue, some alien device somehow sneaks its way into Fantastic Four headquarters and frees the symbiote. It then swallows up some random dude to make its way back to Peter's apartment, where it disguises itself as his old costume. So here, Pete puts it on by accident, not realizing the danger since the costume doesn't alert his spider sense. There's then another possibly unintentionally silly sequence as Peter basically flops about the city because he's trying to get back to the Fantastic Four, but the costume is trying to control his movements. Thanks to the appearance of a group of villains that use Vulture's flight suit technology to become supervillains, Spidey ends up being able to maneuver to the bell tower of a church, and uses the ringing of the bell to hurt the costume, ripping it off of himself. But Pete ends up collapsing from the pain of the noise first, and the symbiote, oddly enough, decides to save his life by pulling him into a lower room, and then it simply burns away. This was clearly intended to be the end of the black suit, but as we all know, it wouldn't be. The black suit actually proved popular enough that Pete began wearing one that looked just like it for a while, but, you know, made out of regular Earth threads. But also, a new enemy was created from this. The first indication that something was wrong would come when Peter is waiting for a train and someone manages to push him in front of the train without his spider sense reacting. Peter does manage to leap away before he's splattered, but we soon see a mysterious figure in a run-down building with a crazy wall focused on Spider-Man. So it's not long before this mysterious figure comes looking for Peter at his old apartment, but instead runs into Mary Jane, who at this point is already married to Peter Parker. And the figure reveals he doesn't just look like the black costume, he is the black costume. This is the first ever full appearance of Venom, right here in Amazing Spider-Man number 299. Man, look at those relatively normal teeth. Guess they hadn't settled on the monster mouth look for him yet. The confrontation between Spidey and Venom, though, won't occur until the next issue, the giant-size special 300th issue. But actually, like how most of this collection is actually not about Venom, most of that issue is not about the fight. After apparently scaring the sanity out of MJ just by, I guess, showing up, though I do wonder if something more is supposed to be implied here, Venom simply vanishes. Peter comes home to a distressed MJ, and the newlyweds decide it would be best to move out to somewhere Venom doesn't know about. MJ settles on a pricey condo that they'd only be able to afford thanks to her modeling career. And Peter's fragile male ego gets pretty wounded at how much more money she makes than him. Are you kidding me, Peter? That's the dream! You could just stay home and make YouTube videos all day. What? Oh. Excuse me. MJ realizes that to get Pete to agree on moving to her dream home, she needs to distract him from his man pain, which she does most effectively. Haha, yeah. That's not all that's rising. Whew. So the pair move into the new place, and at the party afterwards, Pete spots Venom swinging around in the distance, and so decides to follow him. He gets all the way to Venom's rundown loft, but neither his spider sense nor his Akbar sense warned him that it's a twap! Apparently, Venom was just swinging around New York for a long time, knowing that eventually Spider-Man would find him and follow him straight into his trap. which honestly isn't the worst supervillain plan I've ever heard. With Spider-Man a captive audience, Venom reveals himself to be Eddie Brock. Wait, who's Eddie Brock? Despite Spider-Man's recognition of the character, this is actually his first appearance. But it seems he is, or at least used to be, a well-known reporter for the Daily Globe, the main rival of the Daily Bugle that Peter works for as a freelance photographer. It seems Eddie was making a big name for himself writing about a serial killer named the Sin Eater, a name Spider fans will recognize from the story The Death of Jean DeWolf. Captain DeWolf, a longtime ally to Spider-Man, would end up murdered by the Sin Eater, leading Spider-Man to track down and capture the serial killer. But while he was doing that, Eddie had apparently been publishing interviews he had with a man identifying himself as the Sin Eater, and under pressure from his publisher and the authorities, eventually published the identity of that Sin Eater. Only Spider-Man managed to prove that Eddie's story was wrong when he captured the real Sin Eater, and it turned out Eddie's source was only a serial confessor. Eddie is disgraced as a reporter and fired for not better vetting his sources. Even though that's all really his own fault, he blames Spider-Man for all that has happened to him. He takes his anger out by pumping weights, but all that gets him is muscles. Stupid muscles. What good did you ever do for anyone? Sick of his life and how the only reporting jobs he can get are the scandal rags, Eddie decides to take his own life. But since he was raised Catholic, suicide's not only not painless, but also a sin. So he goes to a church to pray for forgiveness. Actually, he says he goes around to multiple churches, which seems kinda weird, but I mean, if it makes you feel better. But that's how he ends up in a church, praying for punishment for Spider-Man, when Spider-Man up above is discarding his symbiote thanks to the ringing of the bell. The symbiote shares its knowledge of Spider-Man with Eddie, and its hatred, even though its last act previously was of kindness. But let's just ignore that, shall we? So now powered up with a cool alien outfit, Eddie seeks revenge on Spider-Man, calling himself Venom because that's what he's forced to write these days instead of real news. Whew! After all that, I feel like you should have named yourself Captain Exposition. Jeez Louise. The two finally fight, and Spidey manages to use the Fantastic Four's Sonic Gun on Venom, but he realizes that the symbiote must have fully bonded with Eddie, and so killing the symbiote would mean killing Eddie. Unable to bring himself to do that, Spidey just drops the gun and walks away? That seems like a dumb idea. What about the bad guy, Spidey? Yeah, unsurprisingly, Venom gets the drop on Spider-Man and knocks him out. He then takes him to that same church and webs him up into that same bell, so that Peter can be pulverized to death by the ringer. Would that work? That must be one seriously industrial strength bell. Peter, of course, gets loose from the webbing and quickly realizes that Venom's webbing is organic, which means the symbiote has to generate it from its own being. Spidey realizes he must be running low on his ability to generate it. So he knocks Venom off the roof of the church, forcing the villain to try and use webbing to catch himself, and then repeatedly cuts the web lines until Venom is out of fuel. Brock hits the street hard enough to knock himself out, and victorious, Spidey gets the Fantastic Four's help in trapping Brock in the symbiote. Venom is then sent to the Vault, a big special prison for supervillains, but uses the symbiote's ability to change his appearance to pretend to be an unconscious guard in his cell, giving him the chance to escape and seek out Spider-Man again. He checks for him at that fancy condo they were living in, but only finds Black Cat, and he proceeds to beat the crap out of her while demanding answers on Spider-Man's location, and even conveniently manages to rip her costume in a provocative way. It's a talent. You know, you two have a similar color scheme going on. Maybe you should try to be pals instead. Anyway, Peter and MJ don't live here no mo because of, something to do with an obsessed stalker fan of MJ's named Jonathan Caesar who kidnapped MJ, but probably the owner of the building felt it was MJ's fault for being so provocative or something and kicked the couple out. Or something. So Peter and MJ have been living with Aunt May at her boarding house for old folks. No, really. But MJ just happens to stop by the building where the condo was located to say hello to the doorman right as Venom is leaving his fight with Black Cat, and she sees him swinging away. So she goes home and tells Pete all about it. Peter attempts to use Venom's tactics against him, swinging around until Venom finds him and they can fight. But he somehow keeps forgetting that Venom doesn't set off his spider sense, and Venom is again able to get a drop on him at a meatpacking plant. Venom dumps a giant vat of discarded animal product on Peter, which is just, vomitorious. Thoroughly grossed out, Pete just nopes out of there, not realizing he's leaving behind a notice with his change of address on it. That's not good. So Venom follows him home, putting the lives of everyone at Aunt May's place in danger. Luckily, Venom has a weird desire to protect the innocent, though he won't hesitate to kill them if he thinks they'll get in the way of his quest to kill Spider-Man, as we saw when he killed some cops earlier. What this means is he doesn't want to fight in front of Aunt May, so he instead picks a location to meet Spider-Man at later. The two meet up for the big showdown, and Venom proves to absolutely have the upper hand, even nearly managing to drown Spidey in the ocean. But in the end, Spider-Man manages to win with the help of some psychology. Realizing that the symbiote still wants to be with him more, he invites the symbiote to leave Brock and come bond with him. But since the symbiote already bonded with Brock, the strain of trying to leave his current host and rejoin with Peter is just too much and knocks out Eddie and the symbiote. Which is, weirdly enough, where this collection comes to an end. So that means it's time for the breakdown. It's a little weird how little a collection called Birth of Venom has Venom appear. He's only in 2 of the stories, whereas most of his big early encounters with Spider-Man will appear in the collection Vengeance of Venom. But honestly, that may be the biggest criticism of this collection that I have. While in one sense I did find myself wondering when the random spider stories of him just wandering around in the black suit were going to end so we could get to the big guy, I also found most of the stories actually pretty entertaining. And it's easy to see, even in his brief time on page, why Venom so captured audience attention. He has basically all the same powers as Spider-Man, he cracks weird jokes the whole time just like Spidey, and he's deeply tied to Spider-Man's past, even wearing one of Spidey's old outfits. He's basically what if Spider-Man went a little crazy and evil, but more than that because he also knows Spider-Man's secret identity and wants him dead. There really hadn't ever been a villain quite like that before. Another thing I learned from reading this is that I really don't like Todd Mcfarlane art. Some of the in-costume stuff is pretty good, but a lot of the art looks pretty ugly and sloppy. I guess I'm glad he was willing to get experimental with what he was doing, but the result was clearly more often a failure than a success. I mean, like this. This almost looks cool, but in order for this to be physically possible, Spider-Man would have to have no abdomen. His chest would have to connect straight to his butt. That's just weird, man. But in the end, I'm still giving this collection a recommendation level of high. It was honestly a pretty entertaining read, and I love learning the origins of characters, and Venom's might not be the most creative, but it is fairly unique. The collected edition gets 1 white spider symbol. It's honestly a pretty good collection, containing around 350 pages of comics and includes some early Black Suit sketches, an extensive bio on Venom, a bonus Venom story from the later Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 25 that takes place between 2 of the issues collected here, and several pages containing explanations from before, after, and between the stories collected here so you're not lost when it comes to what's going on. It's clearly a very well thought out collection. Well done, Marvel. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed year 2 of Spider-Man month. I hope to have just one more short little video out for you this month, and then next week I'll start in on my October videos. And for October, I like doing a month-long celebration of Halloween, which maybe we need this year more than ever. So if you're like me and every day is Halloween, then you'll definitely want to stick around for these horror and Halloween themed videos all month long. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you're here for that, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.